Hi, this is Bonnie Marie Williams, and I was listening to VO Boss for years before I began working on the show. It was actually the first voiceover podcast I ever heard, and I absolutely fell in love with it. The energy, the humor, and how much information it provides to the voiceover community. But what I love most about VO Boss is how it takes on the current topics in the industry, how it discusses things we really should be talking about, all of the positivity, and how much time and energy Anne devotes to the show to make it so valuable for all of us. I mean, we just want to rock our businesses like a boss, right? So, Anne, thank you for bringing me into the Boss family and for all you do for bosses everywhere.
Hey guys, Anne Ganguza here. Imagine a voiceover journey where every step is filled with discovery and growth. That's the path I want to work on with you. Through nurturing coaching and creative demo production, let's unveil the true potential of your voice together. It's not just about the destination. It's about the gorgeous journey getting there. Are you ready to take the first step? Connect with me at anneganguza.com.
It's time to take your business to the next level, the boss level. These are the premier business owner strategies and successes being utilized by the industry's top talent today. Rock your business like a boss, a VO boss. Now let's welcome your host, Anne Ganguza.
Hey everyone, welcome to the VO Boss Podcast and the Boss Superpower Series. I'm your host, Anne Ganguza, and I am delighted to be here, and it seems like it's been forever, with my bestie, La Lapidez. Hey, La, how are you?
Hey, Annie, it has been forever. It's been, I don't know, 2 months or whatever it's been, but 2 months
long.
For us is like 2 years. So much happens.
It's been too long. I mean, a lot of things have been happening. I just got back from Podcast Movement in D.C., and I had a really good experience there that I wanted to share some takeaways, if you didn't mind.
Actually, that's cool. I was going to ask you about that because so many of us, and certainly us as talent as well, are doing podcasts or want to do podcasts. Mm-hmm. And that kind of a movement is something we want to know about. So please, sharing is caring.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I had a lot of takeaways. Number one was, first and foremost, it was so nice for me to get outside of my bubble, outside of my studio bubble, my dealing with voice talent, voice actors, and people in the industry. Not that I don't love dealing with people in the industry, but actually going to a conference and immersing myself into a marketplace where I want to sell to, right? Because there are podcasters here, which, of course, I have some podcast consulting services, of course. But I mean, that wasn't my primary purpose. My primary purpose was to mingle with the corporates. Because guess what? Everything I do voiceover, right? Corporate narration, commercial, all of this really directs itself to that market. And it's so nice to be able to immerse yourself in that market and just, hey guys, this might be a novel idea, but just listen, right? Listen to what your potential clients need. What are their problems? What sort of frustrations are they experiencing? And how can you, with your voice or your voiceover product, help them?
Annie, can you give us the infrastructure of it? Because I don't know about that particular world in terms of what a trade show or a convention would look like for podcasters. What did it look like? How many folks were there? How long was it? Did you meet any top level podcasters who we need to know about?
Oh, yeah, I did. I met celebrities. There's celebrity podcasters. The Diary of a CEO, those of you that listen to podcasts. I met the Scrappy podcaster. I met the guy who actually, is in all the videos for Riverside, too. So the conference was 4 days long, and it was in D.C. And this one in particular, it was a little bit more corporate-centric. I go to 2 of them every year. The other one is PodFest, which is very much creatives like ourselves, independent creatives, a lot of, hey, I've got this show, and how can I make money with this show? That's really the question on everybody's mind. And I know that anybody who's ever asked me about podcasting is like, well, how can I make money? And I'm always like, well, don't bank on that right away, or don't depend on that, because it is a passion project for the most part. But this show had a little more of a corporate audience. A lot of those people that are really looking to try to get an ROI, not just from the podcast, but about advertisements on podcasts. And those of you that listen to the VO Boss podcast know that very recently I've been actually adding some advertisements on for my own business. Now, we've been doing the VO Boss podcast for about 8 years, and I thought, well, gosh, maybe it's time that I do one or two. I mean, you guys listen to my podcast, I can tell you, hey, look, I also offer these things. But it's all about, how do you measure success of a podcast? How do you measure if you have ads running in your podcast? Are they effective? Are people listening to the ads, or are they fast forwarding through the ads? And so the overall feel that I got from the conference is that there's so many different platforms right now. There's, how do you listen to your podcast? Is it on Apple Podcasts? Is it on Spotify? Is it on YouTube? And they all have their own measurements, their own stats. And so what advertisers want to know is how many people are listening to your podcast. And sometimes that's really difficult to tell unless you have the statistics. And then these statistics don't all come together so that you can say, overall, I have 1 million downloads. Or I know from my service provider, my RSS feed provider, how many downloads I have. And that can give you a fairly decent number. But again, they've changed the way that they've measured those stats as well. So a lot of times the corporations or the people that are advertising want to know, how can I get ROI on this investment if I'm going to spend money for ads? And the other thing, which is really important, is that there's a lot of people that do ads on podcasts and they sound very different from the podcast, right? Because we've got you and me just bantering back and forth, and then all of a sudden they've got, hey, it's allergy season. What happens is the podcast host doesn't necessarily do voiceover for a living. So what they might read might sound a little stilted. So that was really interesting to understand that, okay, I understand how I might be able to serve them by doing ads or by helping them do their ads better, that kind of a thing. But it was really wonderful to just sit and listen and learn. Oh my gosh. For 4 days, all about the things that I've been doing for 8 years on this podcast. And a lot of it was very validating.
And now the one you went to was in D.C., right? That sounds like a really large, a really big one. Did you find that there were people that you could meet that really helped you understand the road to sponsorship and the understanding of like how you sell ads and how you get into that place? Because I think that's where a lot of early entry podcasters fall down, is like they can create a great program and they can get it launched and it sounds terrific, but what happens next?
Yeah. The thing is that you really need listenership. You really need people who follow you. I mean, everybody refers to Joe Rogan, right? Of course, if you're an advertiser, you want to advertise on Joe Rogan's. But when you're first starting out, you need to, first of all, make sure that your content, if you have a podcast, now I think every voice talent should have a podcast because, gosh, we're equipped for it. We have like really great sound already. And so it just makes sense that if you are a voice actor, it doesn't cost you anything necessarily, except for your time right now. If you have a passion, talk about that. I mean, over and over and over again, what I heard as the theme is that podcasters are storytellers. And guess what? So are voice actors.
Yes.
So if you have a topic that you're passionate about, I think you can start a podcast on. I mean, it doesn't have to be about voiceover.
Now, when you go into podcasting, because I've been doing podcasting for a number of years as well, the question is, you go into it because you love it, you have a passion for it, you want to educate, you want to tell a story. But how do people know when and if they're ready to monetize? That's a big question, I think, in the podcast world. Is
absolutely.
Like, you've been doing it for 8 years. That's a long time to do a podcast while you're running a business and while you're doing everything in your life.
Yeah.
So when and if you should monetize, how that happens.
Well, that's a really great question. And that is like, I swear, it's the question on everybody's mind, even at this conference. Like, how do you monetize? I mean, what are the questions that get answered, right, in podcast? What are the big questions of the day? The big question is, how do I know who's listening, right? How do I track my downloads? How do I grow my podcast? That's the other question. And the other is, how do I monetize? And advertisers and companies and corporations are asking the same questions, right? Because it is such a popular medium. When you get somebody like, I'm going to say Joe Rogan or any of the more celebrity podcasts where you get a lot of people's ears, right? Listening. That is an opportunity to sell. And so while the logistics aren't necessarily quite there yet, you have to showcase that, number one, you've got listenership. You've got a following. Now, VO Boss has a following, and it's a very faithful following, because for me, when I was telling people about my podcast, I would say, okay, I have been a podcast for 8 years. And while my numbers may not be, I do have close to 1 million downloads. I mean, very close to it. Actually, I haven't looked in the last few months. So I probably have 1 million downloads, but it's over a course of time, right? And so what advertisers want to know is how many downloads per episode are you getting? And that kind of gives them an idea of how many ears they have listening to their potential ads. And then, of course, it has to be on the effectiveness of the ad. And I had an interview with Steve Pogach, who is with SiriusXM and Pandora, talking about podcast ads. It's kind of the new area where advertisers are really interested because they've got potential ears to do the selling. Again, it's just you've got to be able to prove to those advertisers that you have downloads. And so right now you have to use the methods that are with you. I mean, there are separate methods. Apple has their own stats. Spotify has their own stats. YouTube has their own stats. And what's interesting is that while we're doing this now on video, right, whereas before we were strictly audio, we're now also on video. So it's kind of like, well, let's use YouTube and put shorts out there, which is, it was good. That was validation for me. I heard that again and again, was to use YouTube for shorts to kind of draw your audience into the audio podcast.
Love that.
So when you think about discussion about synthetic voices, right, we're in the wild, wild west. Well, guess what? We're in the wild, wild west of advertising and podcasting, right? And seeing if podcasting is a popular medium, we know about that. We know that as voice actors, we are primed to be great podcasters because we've got the technical worked out already for the most part, right? We've got the technical. And if you've studied enough, you know how to storytell. You know how to storytell. You can certainly transition to any kind of ads really well. And of course, there's the other thing, Law, and I know you'll like this, is that there's a lot of ads that are done with improv. Celebrity, endorsements do a ton of improv while they're doing the advertisements.
Isn't that cool?
There's another skill that voice actors have. So it really translates well. And if nothing else, right, it costs you your time. And as you and I have discovered, right, and I've discovered after 8 years of having this podcast, and you, since you've come on with me, people now say, oh my gosh, I love listening to you guys, right?
Yes.
Like they met you by listening to you on the podcast. That's absolutely a way to reach out to potential clients or potential people.
No question, fantastic. And I can say personally that, in the last 2 years or however long we've been working together on the podcast.
God, how long has it been?
Almost 2 years, I think.
It might be longer.
When I'm
not
flying
sure.
around and people come up to me and say, I love your podcast. And I for a second, I'm like, oh, the VO Boss. They're like, yeah, you girls are great. It's a weird thing if you're not used to it because there's that disconnect. There's that sense of disconnect from your audience that the audience is there. You see them. They're there. But if you're not meeting them. And you don't know them by name.
You may not hear back from them. The feedback.
You may not hear back from them. It's really incredible.
It's the engagement. A lot of it was talking about engagement. And again, so many parallels to voice acting,
So
right?
many parallels.
So many parallels. You have to engage your audience. And I'm going to tell you, one of the things about podcasting is that we engage people through audio, right? And or video if people are watching us, if they like to see the two of us talk to each other. It's all about engaging and being interesting. And it's either educational or it's entertaining. Right.
No
Whenever
question.
I was watching a presentation on the stage with any well-known podcaster, when they were speaking about that podcast, it was all about their storytelling. And it was all about how it was their passion to talk about a particular subject, something that they loved, they were passionate about. And that's what caused, and everybody's like, well, how do you go viral, right? I mean, there is no magic solution to going viral. I think a lot of it is being engaging, right, with your audience. And then you got to get it in front of your audience's eyes, very similar to our own businesses, right? So how do you grow your podcast audience? The same way you grow your business in voice acting, right? You've got to get yourself in front of the eyes of your potential clients or your potential listeners. So it was really so wonderful to be validated in so many different areas because a lot of times, like you said, we're podcasting out into the air and I don't always hear anything about it unless I speak to someone and they say, oh my God, I love your podcast, or I love what you said about this. What's really cool is then you get the benefit, you reap the rewards of being an instrument and being able to hopefully motivate and inspire somebody.
It's incredible. And you and I, we get letters like all the time, literally every single month, that says, I just want to let you know that I can't get in my booth on a Saturday morning without listening to the podcast and hearing your motivation and hearing what you have to say. And on the most literal basis, you don't realize what kind of impact you can make on someone's life by just speaking a truth and speaking an experience that is maybe common to their experience, or maybe the next level to their experience when they're stuck and they don't know where to go.
Yeah.
It's incredibly powerful, and I'm just honored to be a part of that. But I think you scared a lot of people when you said, or reminded us, because this is not a new thing, that we're also on video too. We're also on camera as well, because a lot of voiceover talent traditionally went into voiceover so that they wouldn't be on camera. They say, with all due respect, Law, I don't want to put makeup on. I don't want to look good. I've got the face for
I don't
radio.
want to look good. Yeah,
right?
gotcha.
And I said, no, you can't look at it that way any longer because you've got to market your business, your podcast, your voice, and you have to do that on video now.
If you think about it, and this is the trend, right? Also like on camera work, right? It's not about, you don't have to be beautiful and young and pretty and handsome anymore. It's all about authenticity. It's all about being able to engage with your audience. And so we invite, right, the perfectly imperfect.
Perfectly imperfect.
I want to hear and see, like, imperfections, because I know that I'm not alone, right? When that happens. And that's for on camera, that's for audio, that's all of that. Just being able to be authentic and really communicate and reach out to your audience, just like we have to do being voice actors. It's becoming more and more and more like prevalent every day that's really what we have to do. I mean, and that's what we like. I mean, as humans, like, why do you think reality shows became so popular? I mean, it wasn't about the perfection of people on a sitcom or a drama or, it was real people.
Right.
And we're real people and we can talk about real things. And so if you guys are thinking about a podcast, please, gosh, we don't need another voiceover podcast. I don't know. Do we need it? Right?
Exactly.
Talk about something that you're passionate about that you can engage with other people.
And it shouldn't be any surprise that, when we're auditioning as voiceover talent and we see that breakdown of relatable and real and conversational, well, that's what we want to see as well. If we're seeing the visual of you, we don't want to see you on as the 70s announcer, nor do we want to see you on as the supermodel of the 80s or 90s. Really, the real person works more often as an actor and talent than the aesthetically beautiful person, according to the industry, and gets cast more often because it really represents the demographic of the people.
Sure.
Right?
And it cuts through the chaos of something being like anticipated or expected or stereotypical, right?
Here's an empathy factor, too. I mean, I want to see someone who kind of is me. There's a deeply psychological aspect to everything we see and hear in entertainment. I would gather that a lot of folks, and I ask them when they talk to me about your podcast, I say, why do you like it? Why do you follow it? What is it doing for you? They say, I feel like you are me. I feel like you understand me. I feel like you're almost in my head. Right? Like the voice in my head. And I think, ooh, that's a lot of responsibility. I better be careful what I say.
Isn't that true?
It is true. Yeah. When you talk about influencers, I always think of the influencer as like the young Gen Z or the young millennial who's on social media. But that's really not true. The influencer is anyone, right, who is out there in the public square and really is connecting to their audience. They can have very powerful influence, positive and negative. So be careful what you say. Be careful how you present yourself. Be careful and just be thoughtful about it because you can impact a lot of people. Now, from a marketing perspective, that's great because for the people that don't know anything about marketing or are a little scared of it, you can have a huge influence on people just by being visible.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it just amazed me the amount of parallels. You think I would have figured this out by now, but it was good reinforcement as I went to this conference. So I highly, highly encourage you, if you can, get out there, listen, find the people that you're trying to sell to. If you can get to a conference, conferences are great because I had presentations to go to, and I also had vendor booths that I could visit, right? And so the interaction, I really listened to the interactions in both instances. And I noticed that when people were on stage talking about something they were passionate about, I have this little pet peeve about millennials have a potential to upspeak. And I'm always telling people when we're doing corporate, please don't upspeak because it makes you sound a little less confident. And I want you to be confident about your product. So when there was the occasion for me to go to a booth and speak to someone about their product, right, and I encountered a millennial, yes, Upspeak is alive and well. However, when that same millennial was up on stage, and this happened on more than one occasion, right, no matter who was up on stage talking, discussing, interviewing, interacting, and speaking about their passion, there was absolutely no Upspeak. Maybe once in a while there was one word or two, but nothing that was consistent because I think it presented a different kind of situation. And I think that as actors, we need to always read those situations. Like perhaps for a commercial, you're going to have that kind of casual engagement where upspeak is absolutely desired. But maybe in another instance, you need to sound more authoritative about that product or confident that you're sure that it's going to help someone. And therefore, maybe upspeak isn't as appropriate. So that was just an interesting little tidbit. And trust me, I listen really hard because, I'm a coach. I want to be a better coach. And so I want to be able to communicate with my potential client better. So first and foremost is listen. And you guys, even if you can't get to a conference, you can do this online, right? You can join groups that are not necessarily just voiceover groups. You can join e-learning groups. You can join a company newsletter. Look at how the company talks to their potential clients. And then you can just really learn about in what situation and how you might talk, the tone of voice that you might use, the emotion that goes along with it. It could be for a quirky brand that has a little bit of humor in it. It could be for a brand that's a little more serious and a little more formal, a little more suit and tie kind of thing. And you adjust your performance accordingly.
Now, you were talking earlier to me before we started recording about at the podcast forum, they were talking about memberships. And I thought that was very fascinating, thinking about creating content and how you can get your subscription base or membership base going with supplying that content. What did you learn from that one? What did you take away on that one?
So that was advertisers who were looking to monetize, right? And so until they felt that people have the capability of fast forwarding through an ad that might be on the podcast. However, if they need to subscribe or have a membership in order to get to that content, if let's say the content is valuable. And it's something I've thought about doing for Via Boss, having a certain amount of episodes that are bonus content, which then help fund the cost. Because as we know, and as I've spoken about multiple times, this does not run itself. I mean, you and I, it takes our time. And then I literally have a team of people that help me to distribute this podcast and put show notes up there, to advertise it on social media. There's just lots and lots of components to the spokes in the wheel, whatever you might call it. But there's a lot of things at play here, and it's not free. So it's helpful to be able to recoup some of those costs and even monetize a living, make a little bit of money because, this is our time. And we do talk about all the time law, right? We need to charge what we're worth. If somebody said to me, well, do you feel bad charging for a podcast when most people can listen for free? Well, honestly, I've been doing it for 8 years. I've given over 400 episodes for free. To be quite honest, if somebody wanted to donate $3 to $5 maybe a month, I don't think that's unreasonable.
I think it's fantastic. I think it's a great idea and makes total sense. I have a feeling that's something that a lot of podcasters are going to be doing. They're going to be interested in doing that. Because no one really realizes, except for you, Annie, how much goes into it until they start doing it.
Until they
think,
do it.
I'll just talk. It's the old voiceover, read a paper and talk. But they don't really realize to produce something, something of value, something specific, something that has guests, something that has planning, producing, engineering. It costs. it's an investment.
Yeah,
to do.
absolutely. And getting yourself out of your bubble and going out and really researching the market in which you want to sell, I think is so very helpful for our businesses so that we can grow and serve those businesses. And voice acting, this whole industry is evolving like as we speak, minute by minute. Things are happening on the AI and synthetic end of things in the market. The economy has a lot to do with it. And we really need to understand what's happening out there and evolve along with what our clients are asking for so that we can serve them better, because we can have a great voice, but if we don't know how to serve somebody with that voice or how to help them solve their problems, then we kind of sit here just having a great voice.
Exactly.
Which is great, but then you and I can just talk
great.
with our great voices, but it may not get us anywhere. It may not pay the bills.
Very true.
In which
Very
case,
true.
by the way, even if you don't get advertisers right away in your podcast, the fact remains that you are putting yourself out there, you're putting your brand out there, and that is a form of marketing all in of itself.
Do you have tips, Annie, for people who want to either start a podcast or who are early, like within the first year of doing their podcast, of what they should be thinking about or be planning for so that they don't fall into any holes along the way?
That's a great question. The one thing that you absolutely have to be concrete on right now is kind of like your why. Like, why do you want a podcast and what is your topic? And is it something that you can sustain? Because consistency, once you get people who start listening, they expect consistency. It's like, look, on my run every morning, I want to be able to turn on the latest podcast of, right? Or I want to be able to, it becomes a thing. So content creators like everywhere know how it's difficult to create content. It takes a lot of time. So figure out what it is that you want to talk about, what it is that you can consistently deliver on a regular basis to an audience. And one thing I definitely found out is that these kind of serial podcasts that only have like 6 to 8 episodes, they don't do well. They don't do well with advertisers. Advertisers don't want to invest in that because they can't expect a great return on investment. It's got to be something where your audience can grow, where you can continue to get the ear of the listener. And so really try to find your why, try to find whatever it is that you want to talk about, and then be consistent about it. Now, you don't have to hire out like I do right now for my podcast. I mean, I did everything on my own to begin with. And so you can start simple and commit to what you can do and make it a priority that you deliver consistently. So,
Love that. So it doesn't have to be constant. It's just consistent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which makes a lot of sense. And being authentic.
Yes.
And really caring about what your audience cares about, the pain points they have, what problems they have to solve and connect to, right? And also, I would add into that, like, what style you want that podcast to be in.
Sure.
Do you want to have a lot of humor? Is it very serious? Is it meditative? Is it calming? Like, think about the kind of style that you want to have. And are you having guests on, or is it really you speaking from your point of view? I mean, these are just kind of basic things that we have to be thinking about it from the beginning. Also, how long? Like, you and I are really consistent about our time. We typically go about 25 minutes per
25 to 30
episode. Like,
minutes.
how long can you talk? How long do you want to speak about your topic?
Gosh, some are hours long. You know what I mean? Some of the best video ones are hours long where there's something visual to look at. And I think Joe Rogan's is, I don't know, hour or 2 hours. I have not listened recently, but really, I mean, we try to keep ours. I think the stats say anywhere from about this time, 30 minutes. But honestly, I think it depends on the content and what you're talking about, and just really feel that out and try to make that consistent as well.
Well, you know, thanks for bringing this to our attention, because this is a world, it's not a new world, but it's an ever-growing world.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
It's becoming complex and very nuanced.
Yes.
And it's something that a lot of talent of all different backgrounds really want to know about and want to be doing and be plugged into it. So this is kind of exciting news.
And I'm excited because I got another podcast that's formulating on the back end. So stay tuned, guys. Something new is coming along for me. And I'm very excited to probably be launching that sometime, I don't know, later this year. So look for that. And I'm very excited.
Keep growing, keep expanding, keep creating, and keep developing. That's really the name of the game, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Annie? Throughout your lifetime. Fabulous.
Thanks, Law. Good conversation. Thanks for asking me about it. I had a great experience, and I'm going to give a great big shout out to our sponsor, IPDTL. You too can connect and network like bosses and find out more at IPDTL.com. You guys have an amazing week, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Join us next week for another edition of VO Boss with your host, Ann Ganguza. And take your business to the next level. Sign up for our mailing list at voboss.com and receive exclusive content, industry revolutionizing tips and strategies, and new ways to rock your business like a boss. Redistribution with permission, coast-to-coast connectivity via IPDTL.